When I lost my job, I had no choice but to move back into my family home. I thought it would be a short stay just until I got back on my feet. I packed my things quietly and told myself it was temporary. But deep down, I already felt like I was walking into a place that wasn't mine anymore. The moment I stepped through the door, I could feel the tension in the air. It didn't feel like home. It felt like I was stepping into someone else's space, even though I grew up in that house. My sister made sure I never forgot that. She barely looked at me when I arrived. The first night I sat down at the dinner table, she raised her eyebrows and said, "You're sitting there?" Like I had taken someone else's seat. I laughed it off and moved to another chair, but that sting stayed with me. It never left. Every day felt like I was tiptoeing around landmines. She would roll her eyes whenever I entered the room. If I opened the fridge, she'd say things like, "Don't touch that, it's not yours," or, "Just because you're here doesn't mean you get to act like this is your house." I kept quiet. I didn't want to start anything. I told myself it was just her way. But each time she said something like that, I felt myself shrinking inside. Mom didn't help either. She was always so neutral, so cold. She never stood up for me. Once when I tried to help set the table, my sister snapped, "You don't need to do that. We have it under control." I looked at my mom hoping she'd say something, anything. She just kept stirring her soup and didn't even meet my eyes. That silence hurt more than the words. I started avoiding the kitchen altogether. I'd wait until late at night to eat just so I didn't have to see them. My own home turned into a place where I felt like I had to ask permission to breathe. My sister started calling me, the guest, whenever she spoke about me, like I was some stranger who overstayed their welcome. "She's still here," she once said on the phone when she thought I wasn't listening. It's been weeks. I used to cry in the bathroom with the water running so they wouldn't hear me. I'd stare at myself in the mirror, trying to recognize the woman looking back. I had always been strong, independent. But now I felt small. I felt invisible. I felt like I didn't belong anywhere. Even the smallest things turned into humiliations. I remember reaching for a blanket in the living room one evening and my sister snatched it out of my hands, saying, "That's not yours." I laughed a little, trying to hide how much it hurt, and went back to my cold room. Lying in that bed at night, I wondered how long I could take this before something inside me broke. The day it finally broke me wasn't even different from the others. Until it was. That morning I woke up early and thought maybe I could do something small to help out. I went into the kitchen and started prepping breakfast. Nothing fancy. Just eggs, toast, and some coffee. I thought maybe it would soften things between us. Maybe if I showed I was trying, it would make a difference. But as soon as my sister walked in, her face twisted like I had just spilled something on the floor. She looked at the eggs, then at me, and scoffed. "We don't need guests acting like hosts," she said, reaching past me and snatching the spatula from my hand. I stood there frozen. I didn't say anything, I just nodded and stepped aside. I could feel my face getting hot. I blinked quickly, trying to keep the tears from coming. I walked out of the kitchen without another word and went back to my room. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the wall. It felt like my chest was tightening from the inside, like something heavy was sitting right on top of my heart. I told myself to hold on. Just for a little longer. Just until I saved enough to leave. But later that afternoon things exploded. I heard my sister shouting something downstairs, but I couldn't make out the words. I ignored it, thinking it had nothing to do with me. Then I heard loud footsteps storming up the stairs. Before I could even react, she barged into my room. Her face was red, furious, like she had been building this moment up for weeks. Without a word, she grabbed my suitcase from the corner, flung it open, and began tossing my clothes into it. "I'm sick of this," she spat. "You don't belong here." I tried to stop her. I reached out, pleading, "Please just talk to me," but she shoved past me like I was nothing. Then with one loud motion she dragged the suitcase out and threw it down the stairs. It hit the bottom step with a thud and clothes spilled out everywhere. My underwear, shirts, even an old photo of me and Mom that I had kept tucked between layers. I rushed after her, trying to gather my things, but she stood at the top of the stairs with her arms crossed. "Go stay somewhere you're actually wanted," she shouted. Then she turned around and walked away like what she did meant nothing. I picked up my scattered clothes slowly, each piece feeling heavier than the last. My hands were shaking, but I didn't let a single tear fall, at least not in front of her. Once I had gathered everything, I went into the bathroom and locked the door. That's when I broke. I slid down to the floor, holding my clothes in my lap, and cried silently. Not the kind of cry where you sob out loud, but the kind where your chest hurts and your mouth stays shut because you don't even have the strength to make a sound. I could hear them laughing downstairs. I don't know what was so funny, but their voices made everything worse. I covered my ears and leaned against the wall, whispering to myself, "Just breathe. Just breathe." In that quiet moment, something inside me clicked. I wasn't angry. Not yet. I was just empty. Like I had been drained of everything. That night, I sat on my bed with a small bag packed and my phone in my hand. I didn't tell anyone anything. I just decided. I was done. Done begging to be treated like a human being. Done hoping for kindness that never came. Done crying in a house that once felt like home but had become a prison made of cold stares and cruel words. They didn't want me there. And I realized I didn't want to be there either. That night I didn't sleep. I sat in bed, staring at the ceiling while the rest of the house went quiet. I waited for the lights to go out, for the distant sound of the television downstairs to stop, for the silence that told me everyone was finally asleep. Then, with a calm I didn't know I had in me, I stood up and started packing. No crying this time. No hesitation. Just quiet movements in the dark. I folded my clothes slowly, one by one, careful not to make noise. I only took the essentials. My warmest sweater, a few outfits, my documents, my laptop. I left the rest behind. I didn't want to carry anything that reminded me of how I'd been treated. I slipped my shoes on and looked around the room for the last time. It was strange, how empty it felt even with my things still in it. Like I had never really been part of that space to begin with. I wrote a note, not a letter, just a small line on a scrap of paper I found near my bag. I didn't explain anything. I didn't pour my heart out or ask for understanding. I simply wrote, "Gone." That was it. I left it on the nightstand. And I didn't slam the door. I closed it softly, pulled my coat tighter around me and walked away without looking back. Outside the air was sharp and cold, but it felt cleaner than anything I'd breathed in weeks. I walked down the street with my bag dragging behind me, not knowing exactly where I was going, but knowing I couldn't stay there a moment longer. What they didn't know was that I had been planning this quietly for weeks. Even while I was crying in that bathroom or pretending not to hear their jabs, I had been working. I had a little online gig, helping with resumes, editing small projects, taking on anything I could find. It didn't make much, but I'd been saving every penny. I never asked them for money. Never relied on them. Not even for bus fare. It wasn't much, but it was enough. By morning, I had signed a short-term lease on a tiny basement apartment on the other side of town. The walls were cold and the windows were tiny. The fridge made weird noises and the heater barely worked. But when I stepped inside, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long, long time. Peace. No footsteps outside my door. No whispering voices behind walls. No one calling me a guest in my own family. Just quiet. I made myself a cup of instant coffee and sat on the floor with my back against the wall. There wasn't even a proper chair yet. But I smiled. I smiled for the first time in weeks because I knew that from that moment on, everything that happened would be on my own terms. 2 days passed before I got the first text from my mom. That's how long it took them to even realize I was gone. Sitting in that little basement apartment, wrapped in a blanket and sipping lukewarm coffee, I started to breathe differently. Slower. Freer. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't walking on eggshells. I wasn't waiting for someone to snap at me or humiliate me just for existing. I was alone, but I wasn't lonely. I was safe. And that safety made me think of everything I'd endured just to keep that family running behind the scenes. Things they never saw. Things they probably never even thought about. See, about a year ago, when I first moved back in after losing my job, the bills were a mess. My sister had terrible credit. Mom too. Everything was either overdue or about to be shut off. One evening, I overheard them whispering about the power company sending final notices. I remember feeling embarrassed for them. But more than that, I felt responsible. I was living there too after all. So I stepped in. I called the power company and offered to put the electricity bill in my name. They hesitated at first, but I had good credit, a clean record. They accepted. Then came the water bill. Then the internet. Month after month I paid. Quietly. Without being asked. Without expecting anything in return. They never once said thank you. Not even a nod. In fact, sometimes they'd still complain. About slow Wi-Fi or how cold the house was, never realizing I was the one keeping it running. I paid every bill out of my side hustle money. The same money I was supposed to save to get back on my feet. But I kept doing it because, deep down, I just wanted to be accepted. I thought maybe they'd see me differently. Maybe if I made myself useful, they'd stop treating me like a burden. They never did. Even when I was paying for everything, I was still just a guest. That night, after my quiet exit, I logged into my online accounts and did something I had never done before. I stopped the payments. No announcement. No warning. No explanation. I just went into each account, electricity, water, internet, and removed my card details. I let the billing cycle run its course, and I walked away from that responsibility the same way I walked away from the house. Because that's the thing no one tells you. Sometimes peace doesn't come from fighting harder. Sometimes it comes from letting go. While they sat in that house thinking I was the problem, they had no idea the lights above them, the warm showers, even their ability to scroll through their phones, was made possible because of me. Now I focused on something else entirely. Myself. I spent my mornings applying for full-time jobs, sending out resumes, tweaking my profile. I used the quiet hours of my afternoons to work freelance gigs online. Every time I got paid, I put a little away, not for them, not for rent, but for me, for my growth. I lit candles in my tiny apartment and played soft music while I worked. I made my own meals, even if it was just rice and beans some nights. I wrote down goals. Little ones at first, like buy a lamp or apply to 5 jobs today. Then bigger ones. Move to a better place in 6 months. Start therapy. Reclaim your worth. And as the days passed, I started feeling like someone again. Not their guest. Not their burden. Just me. Whole. Quietly healing. Quietly rebuilding. And I knew the day would come when the silence I left behind would turn into questions. They would wonder why the lights were flickering. Why the Wi-Fi stopped. Why the hot water was gone. And eventually, they would text. But by then I'd be too far ahead to care. 1 month had passed since I slipped out of that house in the middle of the night. No dramatic exit. No grand announcement. Just me quietly reclaiming my peace. I hadn't heard a word from them since. Not a call, not a message, not even a shallow check-in to see if I was alive. Then suddenly my phone lit up. It was Mom. The power just got shut off. The message flashed across my screen, followed by a string of frantic texts. Where are the bills? Why is the internet gone? Your sister can't do her online work. What's going on? I stared at my phone for a long moment, completely calm. No racing heart. No guilt. Just a strange, satisfying stillness washing over me. I slowly typed back. Guess the guests took the electricity with them. Then I gently pressed the side button and put my phone on silent. I didn't need to see what came next. I could already imagine it. The confusion, the sudden realization, the scramble. Maybe my sister was pacing the living room, complaining about how her phone wouldn't charge. Maybe Mom was rummaging through the drawers, looking for a shut-off notice she never received because they were all emailed to me. Meanwhile, I leaned back on my couch, tucked under a soft blanket, and watched the soft glow of my own lamp flickering warmly in the corner. It was quiet, beautifully, richly quiet. No one yelling across the hall. No slamming doors. No snide comments tossed at me like scraps. Just the steady hum of my own space where everything worked because I made it so. For months they treated me like I was nothing. Like my presence was an inconvenience. Like I didn't belong. And now, without ever raising my voice or seeking revenge, I had reminded them exactly how much I was holding together. That silence, the one that followed my last message, felt like justice. Not the loud kind with screaming and slamming, but the soft kind, the kind that settles in your bones and tells you, you did the right thing. I took a sip of my tea, looked out the window at the evening sky and smiled. Let them sit in the dark. The calls started the next morning. First it was my sister. Her name popped up on my screen over and over again, 5 times in the span of 10 minutes. Then came the text. Can we talk? Please come back. We need to figure this out. I stared at each message as it came in, not surprised, not moved, just still. Then Mom joined in. I didn't know she was treating you like that. I'm sorry. You should have told me. Come home. We can fix this. Funny. All the times I sat across from her at the dinner table, silent tears in my eyes, picking at cold food while my sister made cutting remarks, she didn't know? When I tiptoed around the house just to avoid conflict, or when I sat in the corner like an unwanted guest, she didn't notice. And now that the lights were out and the Wi-Fi was gone, now they wanted to talk? The next round of messages hit harder. Family doesn't walk away. We're all we have. You're punishing us for no reason. I read those words and felt nothing but clarity. As I remembered the sound of my suitcase thudding down the stairs. My clothes spilling out like trash. My sister standing at the top, smirking, saying, "Go stay somewhere you're wanted." I remembered locking myself in the bathroom, pressing my hands against my mouth so they wouldn't hear me cry. I remembered the sound of their laughter outside that door. And most of all, I remembered how not one of them came to check on me. Not even Mom. So no, I wasn't coming back. And no, I wasn't going to play the role of the forgotten helper who keeps the house running while being treated like a burden. I didn't respond. I didn't call. I didn't explain. I just let them sit in that dark, quiet house. No lights. No internet. No me. Let them feel for just a moment what I felt for so many months. Isolated, ignored, and unimportant. Only now I wasn't crying in a locked bathroom. I was sipping coffee in a warm room I paid for myself, wrapped in peace I built from the ground up. I wasn't useless. I was just finally unavailable. A month later, I decided to visit the house one last time. Not because I missed them. Not because I wanted to fix anything. I just needed to see it, to remind myself why I left and to finally close that chapter without questions hanging over me. I didn't tell anyone I was coming. I just walked up to the old front door, the same one I had quietly slipped out of weeks ago. When I stepped inside, the air felt different. Heavy. The house was dark except for the flicker of candles in the living room. No TV buzzing. No kitchen sounds. Just quiet. The kind that didn't feel peaceful, just empty. My mom looked up from the couch when she saw me. Her face softened instantly, a mix of surprise and relief. She opened her mouth to speak, but I raised my hand gently. My sister was in the corner, pretending to scroll through her phone, but I could tell she hadn't really been reading anything. She didn't look at me. Not once. She just sat there, shoulders tense, eyes down. I looked around the room that used to suffocate me and now felt like a faded shell. The home they once claimed as theirs was cold. Dim. It didn't feel like anyone belonged there now. I took a breath and said calmly, "You taught me what I was worth. And I'm finally living like it." The silence that followed was loud in its own way. No one argued. No one said sorry. No excuses, no promises to do better. Just that stillness and the soft crackle of a candle nearby. Then Mom, almost in a whisper, said, "We're behind on bills. If you could just help us for a few weeks." Her voice trailed off before she finished the sentence, like she already knew what I was going to say. And she was right. I smiled, not cruelly, just honestly, and replied, "I'm sorry. I can't." There was no anger in my voice, no bitterness. Just a quiet certainty. The kind that comes from choosing yourself for the first time in a long time. I turned, walked back to the door and stepped outside. I didn't slam it. I didn't look back. But as it closed softly behind me, I felt it. That silence, the one I left behind, wasn't just the absence of noise. It was the sound of consequences. And I knew in that moment, it would echo louder in that house than any argument or shouted goodbye ever could. My new life is small, but it's mine. There's something so peaceful about it, so grounding. The apartment, a simple basement unit with just enough room for everything I need, feels like a sanctuary. The walls are a soft, welcoming color, and I've decorated it in a way that makes me feel at home. Bright, cozy, with little touches that remind me I'm in control here. I pay my own bills. I handle my own schedule. Every morning I wake up in a bed I bought with my own hard work, in a place I've built with my own hands. It's quiet. Not the oppressive, suffocating silence of the house I left behind, but a peaceful kind of stillness. No one telling me where to go, what to do, or when to leave. No more pretending to fit into a space where I was never welcome. Just my space, my peace, my rules. I sleep in comfort now without worrying if the lights will flicker off at night. I no longer lie awake, listening for the sound of footsteps in the hallway or the low murmur of voices just outside my door. I fall asleep without guilt, without the weight of 1,000 unspoken judgments hanging over me. I've learned to visit people who actually want me there, not just tolerate my presence. People who offer me warmth, kindness, and most importantly, respect. When I walk into their homes, I feel like I'm truly seen. Not like a guest who doesn't belong, but as someone whose company is genuinely wanted. It's a huge difference. one that fills me with gratitude every single day. As I stand in my small kitchen making myself dinner, I reflect on how far I've come. I used to think that leaving was a sign of failure. That walking away from people who were supposed to love me meant that I was weak. But now I realize that sometimes, leaving isn't weakness. It's strength. Strength to stop accepting less than you deserve. Strength to recognize that you are worthy of respect, of peace, of love. Leaving was the hardest thing I've ever done, but it was also the smartest. And in the quiet of my home, surrounded by everything I've worked for, I can see that I was never really the guest in that house. No, I was the one who kept everything running. I was the one holding it together. I was the one keeping the lights on. They said I didn't belong. So I left and took everything I gave with me,